How do? I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Firstly, this is Kate. Prison can be a harsh education. She's an author and writer, unlike myself. A teacher, a prisoner, hope, based on real events. This book's called Ghosted. I'm going to read this book and I'm going to review this book. So, Kate, introduce yourself first, love.
All right, well, I'm Kate. So I was a prison teacher for about 3 years.
Oh, are you not going to do the Northern Bird bit?
Oh, yeah, obviously. And obviously, the most important thing to know about me is that I'm aged, menopausal Northern English teacher.
Yeah, I definitely was not going to say that. So we spent a bit of time together. We've had a brew. I do know civilians in prison. I've never fired questions at them. There's a lot to go at. When we've finished interviewing Kate, if you would like, because we're going to speak again, she's got a lot of questions for me that we won't get done today. Any questions, put them in the comments. I'm just going to go at it as it crops up. And away we go. So first question, in no particular order. Did working in prison have a positive or negative effect on your good self?
I think I'm still 50-50 on that. So positive in that I learnt a lot about myself. I learnt a lot about how I'm able to work with anybody, and I've got this way that I won't judge anybody. I can just literally put whatever they might have done to one side and just meet them as they are, and I didn't really know that I could do that.
So not be judgmental.
Yeah.
Always a good thing if you're going to be working in prison. Yeah,
so I learned a lot of good things about myself, but the kind of flip side of obviously working in prison is that I mean, I think I did pretty well to last sort of just over 3 years. I mean, I saw teachers come and go in like literally a day.
Why?
They couldn't hack it. They literally just walked in, and the air is almost different. You can just feel that atmosphere.
It's a very negative environment. Did you feel that when you first went into prison?
Yeah. I mean, we had an airlock to go into ours, and it was almost like the air was different as soon as it shut behind you. It was like this kind of small place, but at the same time, it was like a miniature version of what everybody expects. So you kind of go through an airlock, obviously leave all your stuff behind, and then you've got this little place, and it's got a library, it's got a medical centre, it's got a school, it's got work, it's got a house, it's got a church, and it's also got its own little prison as well, which is the Zeg. So it's kind of just this kind of world in miniature, which I actually quite like the boundaries, because as I'm a teacher, I was always like working long hours, really late into the night, marking homework, marking assignments and all of that. And obviously in prison, you can't take anything out with you. Everything has to be done on site.
Yep.
Then you leave, airlock, you leave, and everything you leave behind you. And that's what I thought for about a year.
That you weren't taking work home.
Yeah, and then I realised actually I was taking it home just in my head instead.
Yep.
So unfortunately my dad died when I was in prison. And I found out that he'd been found dead when I was in a prison class. So that was the kind of the big thing that made me go, I really like the boundaries. Like, this is work, that's home. And literally home came right into work. I got pulled out of a class and told what had happened. So that was the kind of start of my head not really working. Who told you that? My husband rang in.
Yeah.
And then my boss just came to get me and just said, leave your class, we'll send him home, go and find out.
So it was done in a sympathetic...
yeah, well, my husband did it and then just said, get home, you need to come back now. And the weird thing is that when I put the phone down, obviously I wasn't able to just drive home and sort stuff out at all. But so I actually sat with a couple of the prisoners who were the orderlies.
Yep.
So they were actually the ones that kind of just sat me down, talked to me, gave me a strong cup of tea. And, you know, so when you say was prisoner positive or negative, you know, the humans I met in there, they weren't just the staff, they were the prisoners as well, you know. But obviously that didn't help my head. So after about another year or so of all the stuff to do with my dad and then going back inside, meant that I got PTSD.
it's a very tough gig, prison, if you've
Yeah.
got stuff going on, isn't it?
Yeah. I think, yeah, and it makes you realise how you behave when you're in prison and you think you're fine. So for a year, I was not sleeping very well at all. I was only really sleeping at the weekends and only really on a Friday night, because on Friday night you can sleep properly because you don't have to think about work on Saturday.
Yep.
But by Sunday, you can't sleep because you know you're going to go back to work on Monday, and you have to kind of keep up a bit of a guard. You don't want to, but you know you've still got to go in, and you know you can't talk about your family, you can't talk about who you are. You've got to keep stuff separately for safety. And after a year, it just becomes second nature to you, and you think, I'm fine, I can do this. But you don't realise until something else happens, and you think, I'm not even feeling anything. Why not? And it's like, because I haven't let myself feel anything for about a year.
Did your family notice a difference in you? Have you ever discussed it with your family?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my daughter used to come home from school and go, oh, how are you doing, Mum? How was work? And I'd go, fine. And then she'd say, any kick-offs? And I'd be like, of course. And then that was the end of the conversation.
Did you not want to discuss it with them?
No, I didn't want to, because I think if I told them the stuff that I'd seen, the stuff that had happened in class on the wings or whatever, then I knew they'd tell me what I knew already, which is that I probably shouldn't be there. So I thought, if I don't tell them, then I won't hear what half my brain is saying. So I just thought, I won't tell them.
Are you passionate about teaching?
Yeah, I still am a teacher as well, so yeah. But I just...
And your background was based in uni, weren't it, before you went to prison?
Yeah, I taught for 26 and a half years at a university. Came out and thought, I still want to teach. I'll go for a college job. And as I arrived at what I thought was the college, I realised it wasn't a college, and it got barbed wire around the top of the fences. And it definitely wasn't a college.
That could be a college now, it could be a school.
Yeah, well,
Have you seen some of the schools now?
Yeah, I've got friends that teach in schools where they've got the knife detectors to walk in. Because I joke with her.
Portal.
Yeah, the joke is that I never had to go through a portal to work in prison, but she does to work in a school.
I'm not sure, excuse me if I'm wrong, where I used to live in Sheffield, Firth Park, I think before I joined the prison service in 2001, Firth Park School was the first school to have a portal for people to walk, pupils to walk through.
And it was talked about that all the teachers would have to have their body cameras at one point, but we didn't. Not when I was there.
Wow, stab vests and body cams.
No, we weren't allowed stab vests. We had a radio.
I won't be surprised at some point if that becomes the norm.
Yeah, I think that was my kind of limit that I said to my boss. If I ever think I have to wear a stab vest or a body camera, then I will leave, because it's clear that I don't feel safe. I think the minute you don't feel safe, you shouldn't be there.
So if I told you now, my friend Zach, if you see this, has just started paramedic training, and the other day they rolled out stab vests, Midlands area, and quite a few people on the course actually left when they realised they need to wear a stab vest to do the job as a paramedic.
Yeah. And I'm actually really, really pleased that Zach's got a stab vest, because I know that some don't.
Shocking.
So, you know.
do you think, I think you're quite forthright.
No, surely not.
Sort of a worldly person. Is that why you lasted longer than, a couple of days in prison, do you think? Because the teachers I got to know, when I say got to know them, didn't know them very well. I knew the workshop instructors, like we said. I didn't know teachers very well, but a lot of them were very guarded, and I always felt, probably because I didn't know them well, but teachers I come across, I always felt like I was a second-class citizen as a prison officer, so they might well talk to the pupils different to myself. Did you ever feel sort of staff being hostile towards you? Or, we used this word, didn't we, snowflake? Yeah. You used to get called a snowflake at uni, which...
I don't know, it's called a snowflake in prison.
Did you?
Yeah. I mean, like everywhere, there are lovely staff and there are not so lovely staff. But I always found it really interesting that it would take me about a day to learn all my students' names.
Yep.
But it took me about 6 months of being there before the staff actually asked what my name was.
Yep.
So if I was in class and I'd say to somebody, right, what's your name? Because obviously I've got to do the register, and they'd give me their prison number, and I'd go, no, what's your name? And they give me their surname.
Yep.
And I'd say, no, third time, I'll call you by your surname, but I'd rather use your first name. And they'd say, oh, it's Matt or whatever. Officers, they wouldn't give me their names if I'd sort of say hello to them. Till I'd been there about 6 months, and then one of the older hands, shall we say, just said, yeah, the teachers come and go so much that we don't bother to learn their names until they've been here 6 months, and we think they're a stayer. And I thought, to be honest, I can see the point. There is quite a high rotation, you know, some only lasted a day, some are still there years and years on, you know, some are stubborn.
Prison officers on K-Wing, 200 cons, knew all the names, knew what cells they're in pretty much. Probably took me maybe 3 or 4 years before I knew all the staff. You know, you would see some staff you knew really well, you might see 4 times in a year, you know, coming in. There was one, Ash, I always used to say when I saw him, you know, it'd be January, Happy New Year for the following year, because...
Yeah. But I mean, you know, I wasn't, I mean, you said, like, had I got any hostility towards staff? I mean, they used to jokingly call me Snowflake, and then it became Code Snowflake. Because
I like that, Code Snowflake.
Code Snowflake, yeah. Instead of all the other different codes that we'd have for various incidents. And they used to yell at if I used to come on the wing. Because I think initially, they also had this perception that, you know, maybe I shouldn't be on the wing, maybe I should just stayed on the class. But I also used to teach creative writing and kind of creative stuff.
Yep.
I used to go onto the wings to do that. And I think a lot of them, to be fair, thought, here's a civilian coming onto the wing, and I represented something else that they got to watch out for.
Did you have to sign in when you went on the wing?
Yeah, always.
So you went in the wing office, announced that you were there.
I used to drive them nuts by saying hello in this really annoying snowflakey way.
Northern accent.
Yeah, with obviously a slight accent.
Yeah.
I used to wear the most flowery dresses possible so they could see me at any point.
Oh, I'm going to hit you with this question now. One teacher I believe she got sacked. What do you think about dressing appropriately in prison?
I was given a dress code when I went in. I was told what I could wear. What the college did. They told me, obviously, dress appropriately, wear sturdy shoes. Was the other one.
See, it's not the shoes I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about skirts, blouses, because this is a topic I would imagine in today's current climate is quite difficult to approach.
Yeah, I mean, they basically said in this handbook, normally we would never tell somebody what to wear because it's not appropriate. However, you have got to be aware of the fact you're going into a very different environment. Therefore,
male environment.
Yeah, and it was a male prison. Yeah, like keep yourself covered up. Don't wear anything that shows your shoulders. If you've got too much skin on show, you'll be walked out and you won't coming back.
Really?
Yeah.
Who told you this?
The college and the prison. And I know somebody who was who came in something that I thought was okay, and she said, "Do you think I'm all right today?" I went, "I think you should stay in the office, not be in general population." And actually, an officer came round and looked her up and down and said, "No, you've got either you go change or whatever." So, you know, but the joke was that, and it's in the book as well, I had like a lucky cardigan. That if ever I thought like I got a dress that was short sleeved, that might be seen as having too much skin on show, so I'd put my cardigan on. And then of course I'd sweat buckets in a classroom because you couldn't open the windows.
Besides being menopausal.
Yeah, I knew you'd pull that, yes, absolutely. And then the men would laugh because they'd be like, "Oh, you got your back to the wall against me, so you're scared." I'm like, "No, I'm just sweating so much, I don't want you to see it."
So I'll tell you now, we had a lass with an officer who was a really good officer, and the teacher come on the wing and she called her into the office, and I happened to be in there, I was doing something in there. I have never been so embarrassed. However, what she's saying were right. This lass, she said something like, "You dress like a $5 whore." Yeah. No, obviously I wouldn't have got away with that. She had a very short skirt on, high heels, bare legs.
Weren't allowed to wear heels, definitely.
Chest on display, and she said, you're not coming on this wing, and you know, wherever you've come from, you need to go back there, and if there's a problem, then you get your manager to phone me, but you're not coming on this wing dressed like that. That is a difficult one. I'm going to drop this one on straight. I like to do this. I'm very random, me.
I was going to say, blokes also got sent home for wearing jeans rather than trousers on our unit. So the male teachers, the male teachers also had a dress code. But it wasn't
for me,
quite as
civilians, as long as you're dressed appropriately, like we just said, not on display, then there's no need for the shirt and tie thing for me. You know, as long as you identify as a teacher.
Yeah.
You know, you can be identified, obviously. All right, drop this one on you. I'm making you education for all of prisons. I'm going to you an unlimited budget, and I'm going to give you a limited time to answer me as well.
Okay.
So you've got unlimited budget. You are head of education for the whole prison system. What are you going to do?
Well, I'm going to start with something that everybody can do and have creative classes. So really small classes as well, so only having 4 rather than 8 or 15 like I had. So that you get the same teacher, you get more contact with a teacher to actually work out what the reasons are behind you either not liking education or not doing it, or whether actually you are educated and you've just not got the exams that they say you have.
As you come out with it, can I just play devil's advocate? So I understand what you're saying, however, as we know, everything comes down to a budget, doesn't it? So if you halve the classes, then technically you need twice as many teachers to deliver.
But what you also do is initially you have smaller classes, but you also train people to be peer mentors, so that then you can have bigger classes and have exactly the same kind of experience for all your learners, but you've got maybe 1 or 2 men who are peer mentors who
explain what a peer mentor is.
So we had peer, if we were really lucky, there was somebody who was a peer mentor. So my peer mentor, what I had one, would be almost like a teaching assistant. So they'd maybe be the orderly up until when classes started, but then they'd come into class with me, and I'd have planned activities for every one of the people that I was teaching. And if somebody was struggling, then they'd either see or I'd nod to them to go and support that person. Or, I mean, sometimes they could lead an activity, and it was also a really good way of, they could also tell me if something particular had happened the night before. If they knew that somebody was struggling, they often would know the reason for that. They could also say, right, we were going to do this activity today, but maybe we'll change it a bit. So that they were almost like my eyes on the ground on the wing, and then like a really, really good TA.
So you're operating your own dynamic security. You know, I talk about all that. Staff-prisoner relationships. Because without that, you know, you as a teacher, you need to build trust. Obviously, there's some areas you don't want to go. You don't necessarily, and you don't need to know why people are in.
Oh, not at all, no.
No. So how important is education, and when people are leaving prison, how much does it affect, you know, sort of resettlement, how they move on or get jobs or anything else? Is there a shortfall, and how would you fill that?
I mean, it's something that we were talking about earlier, wasn't it? That you weren't aware that actually to go into Cat D.
I was not.
That somebody should have level 1 English and maths.
There can be things that targets for them to achieve before they get Cat D. I knew there were some targets, but I never realised education could be one of them.
Education is one of them, and actually the government and this is where obviously you get, education is often run by external colleges, so it isn't necessarily run by the prisons. So often this is why people like me never got to meet lovely officers, or only if we deliberately
like myself.
Yes.
Obviously.
So we'd never kind of like have that interaction with the people who were actually working with the men outside of a classroom. You know, and we had specific government targets to meet, that we had to get 85% pass rates, we had to get a certain number of hours.
Or what? If you didn't get 85% pass rate, what were the sort of penalties?
Personally, I'd be on a performance review and I'd get sacked if it carried on.
So
Ofsted could potentially come in. We were still subject, as you should be, to like rigorous people coming in and going, are you doing your job properly? How are you supporting people? And you know, we had to feed back quite a lot to people higher up to say, you do realise this isn't a school. And we didn't have in our particular unit somebody that we could say go and get somebody if they were missing from the class. So if an Ofsted or a mock Ofsted came in and said you should have 8 men in your class, you've only got 7, where's that person? I was supposed to go and find out where they were, but I couldn't leave the class, and I wasn't going to show them how to use my radio to ring the wing to find out where they were. But obviously, when you're a teacher, you just have these mad assumptions that you walk into a class and your students will be there and it'll all be fine. And when you walk into a prison classroom, there are at least 3 locked doors between you and them, and they might not be able to get through those doors, or there's an incident, or they've been ghosted and they've been taken somewhere else. So you don't even know who your classroom's going to, you know, who's going to be in it.
You just hit on a problem now. Yeah. And I know this to be true. We've talked about postcode lottery of prisons. Some prisons will have a number 1 governor, make a massive difference. You've worked in a prison where a governor, you know...
Yeah, huge difference, for the good.
Actually getting people to education, you know, if they're short staffed, then they're not necessarily going to turn up, are they? There's some prisons now that are short staffed that basically people are just banged up 2-3 days at a time, might be looking to get a shower or whatever. Going back to your budget, probably links in with workshops. You did mention, you know, bricky shops and plastering shops.
Yeah.
The workshops. We talked briefly about rehabilitation. My thoughts on it, I don't think we rehabilitate anyone. I think people can change, definitely. I know that to be true. You're 50-50.
Yeah, I think if we were better at joining up the education side of it and the workshop side of it, so that people are leaving with practical skills and the pieces of paper that show that they can do those.
What about, you see, for me, what you've just said makes sense. Workshops, education together, and maybe resettlement, which there's a lot said about resettlement, but for me, it's just a title. You know, we're not helping resettle people. There will be a small percentage of prisoners maybe get to go on courses when they go out or things like that. But on the whole, the big majority of prison population, when they get out, it's just bail hostel or home and then trying to survive. Is it not?
I mean, I was kind of trying to tot up the amount of men that I saw come throughout my classes, and then how many I know of them that are on the out and doing well versus how many are either back inside or no longer with us. And again, it's still about 50-50.
So you probably, like myself, when I worked on healthcare, working with people very close, if you've got somebody in education, you probably know more about them than maybe staff on the wing.
Yeah, and that was the nice thing, that the longer I was there, the more that I was able to go onto the wings and say, you know, this person's doing really well, or this person's having a bit of trouble, or they might need to move wing. And again, that kind of dynamic security thing. But I'd always get their permission to tell an officer, but it was always with the whole kind of, if somebody came up to me and said, I need to tell you something, because they tended maybe to do that more because I was a civilian. I would always kind of start by saying, you can tell me what you want to, but if you're at risk or somebody else is at risk, I'll have to tell somebody.
Did you feel like you were put on the spot sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and there were a couple of times where I almost didn't manage to get that statement out before they started talking. I went, no, stop, let me finish. I need to make sure that you can still trust me, so I'm being really honest with you. If you tell me something that means what I think you're about to tell me, I'm going to have to tell somebody. And then they sort of checked themselves and went, no, actually, I'm telling you because I want you to tell somebody, and it was all right. But yeah, I mean, I got put on the spot a lot. Obviously, I think because if you're a civilian working inside, you're also seen as an easy target, which is maybe why I had a bit of an uneasy relationship. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, when we're talking on the corruption front.
Yeah, Yeah.
How did you deal with that? If I come up to you, right, miss, you seem friendly.
Yeah.
Bring me a phone in, I know where you live.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That happened several times. And they, you know, I was offered money to bring phones in, and I said no. And they said, oh, but, you know, think of what you could get for it. And I went, yeah, but every night I get to go home, and I'm really sorry to say this, but you don't. And it stopped after that.
So it wasn't a hard sell?
Did
you ever, anyone ever, me, you know, people have asked.
Yeah, they'd say they knew where I lived.
Every day, private sector, somebody come up every day.
Yeah.
And then they move on to the next member of staff or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, they were, I mean, I think maybe it's because it was a catsie, but they were a lot more kind of sneaky about it. So, you know, I get approached to bring things in and, oh, could you just do this for me? Could you just do this for me? And I'd say, no, I can't, straight away. There were others that were really kind of would try and build up to something. So my Facebook, I've made it completely private. I'd done it obviously before I went in.
Yep.
But it happens to say the wrong city as to where I live. It's not right, and I'm never going to change that. And within about a week of being in there, somebody came up to me and went, how do you get to work? And I thought, oh, I'm not going to tell you. And I said, oh, because somebody told me you rode a bike in. And I was like, do I look like I ride a bike? No chance. And also that would mean that I'd live really close to the prison, so I'm still not going to tell you that, and I don't. And he went, oh, he said, yeah, I did think that city that you live in was a bit far to come by bike. And he knew the exact city that was on my Facebook. So within 4 days, they'd found where I was.
Yep.
They managed to find out pretty much where they thought I lived,
yep.
Even though I'd locked down everything about my social media. So I just thought, I've got to be on my guard. But he just started like that, went, oh, okay. So he was telling me he knew where I lived, or he thought he knew where I lived.
Yep.
And then he'd sort of say, oh, yeah, he said that. He mentioned something about kids. And I said, yeah, that, you know, I hope you can manage to stay in touch with yours. And then after a few weeks, he's like, so you've got kids and I know where you live. What are you going to do about it? And I went, I'm going to go home to them and ignore you. And he went, oh. And other times they were just sneaky, you know, in teaching English, one of the exams is that you have to write a letter.
Yep.
And that's just about layout. And they've changed it as well, so you can do an email because it's a bit more up to date.
Yep.
And one of them said, oh, yeah, I've really got to write a letter. Can you help me write a letter? And I said, well, yeah, of course I can, because it'll help you with your exam in a couple of weeks. He went, yeah, he said, I just need the address of somebody to put at the top. And what he wanted me to do was to go and Google his victim's new address so that he knew where she was.
Did you not fall for that?
Sadly not, no. No, but, you know, there were little sneaky ways where they'd try and trip you up. And you'd be seen as more approachable because you were a civilian. And I think that's also why staff would see you as a bit more reliability almost when you went onto the wings. If there's only 2 of them and they got to bang up 95 lads,
yep.
And then you walk in and going, hello, I'm here, just so you know I'm here. And they're like,
it's an annoyance.
Don't come when it's dinner. So,
when I was on the wings, it used to be annoyance, especially if, you know, like you're in that situation and somebody if you said, can I just have a word with so-and-so in the office or whatever, you would see it as an annoyance, obviously, because...
So I learned to radio ahead and say, is now a good time, you know.
It sounds like you're applying common sense.
No. Survival skills, I think, you know. So there were times in which you knew you wouldn't go on, you know, you wouldn't go on canteen day when it was being given out. You wouldn't go on at dinner time. Any time that there was food, any time they'd just bust open the snooker table balls, you wouldn't go on then either, because you might get one on the head on the way past.
Can I ask, ever felt really threatened, you know, adrenaline's kicked in, fight or flight, fearful for your safety or others?
Yes, but probably only about 3 times in 3 years. Which isn't a bad ratio.
It's not, but you'll be in a position that a lot of people probably will never been in their lives or whatever. Did it not make you go home and think, you know, maybe I shouldn't be doing this, or am I in the wrong job, or...
I think one time that I was scared, but not for me, but for the people in my class, didn't make me think I wasn't doing the right thing. I actually thought, no, I'm all right, I'm doing all right here.
So you were a third party in an incident?
Yeah, basically, yes. Somebody said a word they really shouldn't have done in class, and it started a fight, and I pulled them all apart. Even though I got a broken hand at the time, but never mind, that was a different story. And I was more worried about, obviously, them not killing the guy who'd incited the violence, but also them getting in trouble when he'd actually caused it.
Yep.
So, I pulled them apart and said, look, you've got to stop, because basically you're the one that are going to get extra time. He's going to get away scot-free with it. So
you rationalised it.
And said, do you trust me to deal with this safely? And they said, you deal with it or we will. And I said, right, sit down. What do you want me to do about it? And we went through the right processes, and the right person got extra time.
Right,
I wasn't scared. The other time, I had 2 weeks off straight after.
Really?
Yeah.
And how did you get back? Because, I've been in incidents that were, and you're back at the work next day. Quite often, if you're away, experience a bad experience like that, and you're away, it can be really difficult to go back.
I mean, the lead up to that was that I stopped somebody from coming into the unit, and he turned and I said, I know where you live. And he looked at me, and I knew that he knew, because there'd been something that had happened before where my details had been made public. And I thought, he actually probably does know. And he looked at me like I'm pretty sure he did know.
Yeah.
And I took 2 weeks off. I'd got some time owing, and they said, and they'd been hassling me to take 2 weeks off. So I thought, right, this is the time I'm going to take 2 weeks off and really think about it. And it was tough to go back. But I just kind of rationalised it in my head that actually, that was scary, and he was a big player where I live.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I was nothing to him, and actually he was more vulnerable because he was the one inside.
Yeah.
So if he did anything to me or mine, he was the one that would face the consequences. So I kind of thought, well, legally he's more vulnerable than me, and everybody goes on about safeguarding, and you have to safeguard yourself when you work there, but you also have to safeguard them, and also the victims, which the people that you never see. Correct. So safeguarding is only a third of it is you. And, the people that came in and went, how do I keep myself safe? They're the ones that didn't last. They lasted days.
So while we're on that, if you were doing an advertisement now for teachers, wanting to go in prison, with your experiences, what would you say to people? Because for me, a lot of people I talk to, watch channel and young prison officers, it's forewarned is forearmed. They watch, they know what to expect, what they're going into. So how would you do a recruitment campaign for prison teachers?
I think I would actually get people who've been inside on both sides of the door involved, and get them, particularly men that have been inside, and just look at that idea of putting your judgments to one side, because if you can do that, then you're not scared as well. So but you've got to kind of be forewarned. You've got to know that, the basics, how to keep yourself safe, but also how to keep them safe as well. But I think, talking to people who've been inside on either side of the door is absolutely vital. Not just, I think if you hear lots and lots of horror stories, I think, as all human beings, it does get the adrenaline going, and you do get a kick out of saying, the first few months I was working in prison, I work in a prison, I'm not going to tell you where, and it was all it was exciting, and that adrenaline can be addictive. I've seen that in offices as well. They really they get all,
very good point,
kitted out, all excited, and they're gutted when there isn't a ruck that they can pile into. And that
You've
adrenaline,
seen that, have you?
And it's that adrenaline rush, and you're thinking you are addicted to the excitement that goes with it, and there's nothing wrong with admitting that. And I was there for the first few months. I was like, I get quite a kick out of saying where I work. It's something that not everybody gets to go.
I'm glad you've talked about that. It is true.
Yeah, but after a while, you just think, I am so tired, because that adrenaline high when you're at work. When you get back, you're either so high you can't sleep, or you're so knackered that you sleep straight in your clothes, and then you're back in work the next morning.
Have you done that?
Yeah. Oh, it is sleep in a pool of my own dribble within about 5 minutes of arriving. I used to lift share, so I could sleep in the car.
That's very attractive, that.
I know, it is, isn't it? It isn't. It's a real crowd.
While we're on that subject of getting a buzz off it, let's talk about hyper-vigilance.
Yeah.
When applied to the job and you've got a family.
I think I really noticed that, I mean, it goes back to the idea of not sleeping, being hyper-vigilant, being aware of everything, and you don't let that up, because the amount of energy it takes to get to the point that you need to be at to work means you haven't got time to come down and come back up again at the weekend, so you just stay hyper-vigilant all the time. So we could be walking around just a shopping centre, and I would already have noticed where all the security guards were, which radios they were using, whether their batteries were running out on their radios. I'd probably recognise some of the security guards, which was always a bit of a giggle.
Do you know why I'm laughing? I would not expect a teacher to be so hyper-vigilant and aware of their surroundings like that. Prison officer, yeah, of course you would. Copper, maybe somebody who's military, you know, somebody who's worked on the doors, but I would not expect a teacher to behave like that and be thinking like that.
Maybe it was because we didn't normally have an officer in the building, so I had to be aware of everything that was around me.
Yep.
But, you know, like, yeah, just shopping centres and noticing things like that. If an alarm went off, luckily it wasn't the specific one that our establishment had, but I've heard others that are the same.
Well, I told you, didn't I? Trafford Centre.
Yeah.
Whatever you call the people who walk around in the fancy waistcoats with the radios, when they're, that is just like a prison personal alarm. It was unnerving. Yeah,
and it wasn't just, I mean, like, if I was at a gig and my husband and all our friends would be really getting into it.
Obviously you're into country music, aren't you?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Tell people what you're into, because
I'm into heavy metal. So I'll go to, like, my favourite band is Bring Me the Horizon, Sheffield, so even better.
Yeah.
Best of all worlds. And I went to a gig of theirs and I thought, this is just what I need. I've got a few days off after.
Yep.
This is hopefully just going to drop that adrenaline down a little bit, set me up for a few days off. And the singer just said, push it back, because there was about to be a big mosh pit. And those words I'd heard that week before, and I was already on, like, Meerkat Manor looking round. And I could see, obviously the pit was opening, it was all fine, everybody was enjoying themselves, but I knew where every single security person was. I knew where we have pit trolls in heavy metal, so they actually hire people that help fix and get people out if they're in trouble.
Yep.
So your venue will have security. Yeah. They've definitely got the, because I've seen the same guy at 5 gigs, and particularly the open air ones, if anybody gets in trouble, he just scoops them up and carries them out.
Really?
Yeah, we've got to keep each other safe.
I didn't know that. I've been to plenty of gigs. I've never ever.
You've been to the wrong, it's the country gigs you're going to.
No, I've been to Download and that. Will they have them at Download and that?
Yep.
Maybe.
Yes.
Maybe I was just too loaded on Jack Daniels or whatever.
Okay, right. Maybe they thought you were the pit troll. Maybe that was your job.
Right, with your hypervigilance, that has surprised me. That it really has. Do you think at any point in your career you could have been a prison officer?
Yeah, I think I thought about it. I thought about moving from teaching to go on to the wings. Yeah, absolutely.
Really?
I loved, it sounds really weird, but I loved going on to the wings. But then I also saw how different, and hats off to anybody that can do that for longer than 2 weeks, because it is a different thing. I mean, I saw all the paperwork that went with it, and I suppose that's also why I got kind of the best of both worlds. I got to do the teaching that I loved.
Yep.
I got to do the compassionate, you know, kind of how's everybody doing, checking in on people, making sure they're all right, you know, keeping their acts and all their mental health stuff up to date. But then I got to go home. But I could see the officers having to open up acts, do all the paperwork.
Explain what an act is. I've told people before, there's a lot of new people watching the channel.
An act is basically a protection document. So
suicide and self-harm.
Yeah. So if you are worried about somebody, if they've told you they're going to hurt themselves, then you basically open up this document which outlines what they've said to you, and they then kind of get like a risk rating.
Yeah, that's right, that's fair.
Where basically their history's put in there, so if they've done it before, how they've done it, where their contact details are, things like that.
Multi-agency come together, put a plan together, which includes the prisoner.
Yeah.
You know, they have input as well to keep them safe.
Yeah, and normally, you know, there would be the prisoner's permission to open that act. In fact, often people would say, put me on an act because I know I'm going to do something. Others would say, please don't, because you're going to wake me up every 15 minutes overnight. And then we'd say, well, if you sleep facing the door and they can see that you're breathing, they won't have to wake you. But then there'd be a plan in place as to how to support them until they're not feeling suicidal. Did
you see an increase in ACT forms in your time, i.e. more prisoners on them?
Yeah, I did. They used to joke that was probably my fault because I'd walk on and say he needs to be on one because he's just old.
Anyone can open, you know, if you're astute and you've got a feeling someone's not in a good place, you know, obviously that's something you can do. Did you, well, we touched the answer on this. I wouldn't say I was shocked. However, quite a few lads you come across, you always worked in male prisons, you know, so you get to know them, you're teaching them, you're doing exams or whatever. There's quite a few that didn't leave prison, isn't there?
Yeah. Yeah. We lost a few. Yeah, there were a few times that I'd go in or I'd get a phone call during the night to say that one of my students had taken their own life.
Who? No, we didn't discuss that. Who would let you know that?
Normally a fellow teacher.
Really?
Yeah. So, particularly if it was somebody that I knew, obviously way after family and all the right agencies were alerted, then our managers would know, would be told.
I wonder, you know, obviously it was shocking if you knew a lad. I knew some lads quite close who took their own lives inside, and for me it was shocking. You know, some people, I think that macho environment had sort of shrug it off, it's just a con. So you don't know whether them people are putting on a front or whatever. However...
Oh no, it was always the happy ones. They were the big... that was the
some
thing.
was no clue. Some was no clue. And the fact is, someone who is down, you know, and comes back up in 2 weeks, they seem... That is when... probably, you know, no eyes on them or whatever, and that's when it happens, isn't it?
Yep.
So, was there anyone you particularly got attached to and it had a bit of a profound effect on you?
I think, man, every single time that happened, it just takes a little bit more of you, doesn't it? And you think, I'm trying to make a difference, but when you lose somebody, even though they're only your student, and then you're thinking about, you know, the families, and, you know, we got to help out on family days, so sometimes you'd know their families too, and you'd have met them.
No, that is tough.
But I think the toughest one was actually somebody who I called Dean in my book, who became my peer mentor and became a really good friend, and he was actually one of the ones that sat me down and made me a brew when my dad died. And he made it out. Everything looked like it was going fine, and then I got a phone call about 4 months after he left saying he'd taken his own life. And that was the biggie, because I thought he was like the hope, the one that got out after a significant amount of time in.
Yep.
So the chances were that he wasn't going to be able to readjust.
Yeah.
But he had the support in place. It looked like he'd got everything mapped out for years. And he was the one that always inspired everybody else. I mean, he's the character Dean in my book, and he was the one that used to, you know, got it so that we could have all this really beautiful art graffiti across one of the wing walls and things like that, and he was involved in doing it, and he used to pep everybody else up. He was the happy friend, and he was the one that did it, you know. So that's the one that hurt the most, and still does, to be honest.
You touched on something there. So most lads in prison, we didn't get to know the families. Some of them you did.
Yeah.
You know, if you walk through visits or whatever, and there was a young offender who'd now gone from being a young offender, petty crime, to a armed robbery in Strangeways, you're right, Mr. S, come here, this is my mum. They'd introduce.
Yeah.
So you might there. However, one lad who became incredibly unwell and took his own life, I got to know his mum pretty well because of where they had the visits and stuff like that, and I didn't see it after the event. However, it must be devastating to lose someone in prison.
Yeah.
Someone close.
What we actually did was, and I don't know if this is standard at all, so you can tell me, but we actually had a memorial for him, even though he left.
I think that would be dependent. That would be dependent on maybe some staff. You know, if there is some shining stars amongst prisoners. Mm-hmm. You know, a lot of prisons aren't bad, but there is some shining stars, and equally some staff members who retire and die. We had a few memorials and stuff like that prisoners attended, and I think a lot of it has to do possibly with the chaplain, you know, the church within the prison as well, how things are handled and managed or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we had a pretty strong kind of religious core that actually happened to be next to education as well, so the buildings were kind of almost interlinked. But I mean, so that's where I actually met Dean's family, because they came in. But you know, the ones that died while they were still inside, I met their families too, and that was heartbreaking. And it was also almost like their first funeral, because a lot of them obviously went to inquest.
Yeah.
So we had the memorials quite relatively soon after.
You know, my thoughts on you know, sort of inquests and coroners' courts and that, extremely difficult. The relationship I feel between prisons and coroners' courts, ombudsman and that is not good. It leads to sort of a distrust. You know, I don't think for me, ideally, everyone would have input in order that you could improve the systems if possible. You know, find an outcome so that, but I don't think it works like that.
I think that's probably one of the things that put me off being a prison officer.
Really?
Yeah, it was the paperwork and all the other stuff like that, whereas, you know, and probably what it looked like to officers as well, was I just got to do almost the snowflake bits. That's why they called me Snowflake. I got to do the fluffy bits. I got to do the check-in on somebody, give them something to do to keep them occupied, you know, help them to write a letter, do all these nice things, maybe fill in a bit of an act, but then I got to walk away again. But I could see the prison officers left with all of that. They were holding so many different things and themselves. I thought, I can't multitask. I can take a little bit of the load occasionally, but I can't carry that. I've learnt that very quickly. I could do what I could while I was there. So I could do like a 2-hour writing class, and it might have the whole class in it.
Very poignant, but you know, I never got called snow. I was a soft ass, which I think was an insult.
I think they thought it was an insult.
They did apply soft ass Yorkshire twonk. You know, that was regular. I used to smile a lot at people when they said that.
I don't know what else they called me behind my back, but snowflake was supposed to be an insult, but actually,
well, if someone cares
really.
And they've got some empathy and understanding, and a bit of integrity or whatever, particularly in prison environment.
Yeah.
Do you know what, Kate? I think we're gonna leave it there for now. Definitely food for thought there. There will be lots of things I ain't asked you that I want to ask you.
Me too. I've got loads of questions for you, like what the next book's going to be about.
Well, you know, we'll look up again. The next one, if you'd like to ask me questions, that'd be something I'd like to do, because people quite often, I've got a book out there, so if you read that, you've got an idea of a channel, but you know, my life's more than being a prison officer, and so that'll be good. Thank you for your honesty.
You're welcome.
I have learnt a lot today, and we'll wish you a safe journey home.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming. I'll see you.
Yeah.